The Golden Rose, Chapter 1, The First Glance. This story begins when a man believes he is studying a painting and slowly discovers the painting has been studying him for years. The museum is almost empty. It is a cold afternoon, the kind that makes a city feel smaller, the kind that makes footsteps echo in long corridors. The air smells of old varnish and dust, of canvas that has survived more winters than anyone can count. Voices fade as people step into the gallery, as if someone quietly turned the world's volume down. In the middle of that hush, a man stops walking. His name is Julian Serra. He is 58, with carefully kept grey at his temples and a reputation his colleagues admire. For decades, he has talked about beauty, form, color, and symbols. He has filled lecture halls, signed books, received emails beginning with, "You taught me how to see." On paper, his life is a long list of achievements. Right now, none of that helps. In front of him hangs a single image, a cream-white rose, open at the exact point between promise and decay. The petals curl outward with razor-fine delicacy, as if they could cut the air. Around them, golden leaves unfold like hands that might be protecting or displaying, or both. The frame is an excess of gold swirls and curves that clutch the painting in a luxurious cage. Behind all that perfection, the background, a cracked surface, full of tiny fractures, like dried skin, like thirsty ground, like something that has held itself together for too long. Julian takes a step closer. He does not think about theory or dates or catalogues. He only feels a precise discomfort like a splinter under the skin. The rose, so pure, seems to float over a world that is falling apart. A beauty pretending not to see the disaster that holds it up. And without meaning to, he thinks of his own life. He thinks of his immaculate kitchen at home, the neatly arranged living room, the books on their shelves sorted by topic and color. He thinks of picture frames, himself and his wife on a trip, himself and his daughter in a museum, himself and a group of smiling students at graduation. Smooth surfaces, pleasant images, no cracks in sight. Underneath the tension he has trained himself not to look at. His wife's voice reaches him like a recent echo. "You spend your life talking about love, about beauty, about meaning, and there is none of that left in this house." She did not shout when she said it. She sat at the dining table with a cup of tea between her hands and a calm so firm it hurt more than any accusation. He answered with polished sentences, long words, explanations. She listened, set her cup in the sink with a sharp little sound, and left the room. Now, facing the rose, Julian hears that sound again. Porcelain hitting steel. A small impact, enough to know something has cracked. "This can't be just decoration," he mutters, not realizing he has spoken aloud. Footsteps behind him. The curator, the woman in charge of the collection, walks over. Her eyes are practical. Her hands carry the memory of cotton gloves. "Does it interest you?" she asks. Julian keeps his gaze on the painting. "It unsettles me," he says. "I'm not sure if that counts as interest." She smiles, pleased. "Better than I like it. We have plenty of that already. It's an odd piece. The painter barely exists in the archives. It doesn't quite fit anywhere. Too much gold for the purists, too strange for the decorators. It stayed here mostly because no one knew what else to do with it. Stayed here because no one knew what else to do with it." He swallows. Some lives survive that way too, not because someone chooses them, but because no one bothers to tear them down. I want to talk about it, he says suddenly. The rose? She asks. The whole thing. He gestures at the flower, the gold, the fractured background, the frame. I want to give a series of talks just on this. Not as one example among many. Let it be the whole subject. A whole series on one painting? She looks amused, as if she is not sure whether this is brilliance or a midlife crisis. 4 talks, Julian says. Maybe more. 1 on the rose, 1 on the gold, 1 on the cracks, 1 on the frame. Appearance, power, time, limits. A whole life condensed into a single image. I think it can work. She studies him for a second. If you're willing to do it, I can get you the auditorium and the dates, she says. But I should warn you, people love to be entertained. They tire quickly of depth. Julian lets out a small laugh with no real joy. Then maybe this will tell me which one I've been offering all these years, he replies. She moves away to welcome a group of visitors. Julian is alone again, but he no longer feels like a simple observer. He is just committed to something that will force him beyond the safety of his books. Writing clever arguments about beauty, power, time, and limits is easy. He has been doing it for decades. Speaking about them without feeling like a liar may be harder. He hears other footsteps. Lighter, familiar. Are you sure the painting isn't looking at you, Professor? He turns. At the edge of the gallery, a notebook in hand, and her coat slipping off one shoulder, stands Laura Vidal. For years she was the most promising student in her year. Now she is a colleague researcher, lecturer, and something more complicated to define. Her eyes still hold the bright curiosity he remembers, but there is a new sharpness there, earned through disappointment. Laura, he says, surprised at how warm his voice sounds. I didn't know you'd be here. The curator invited me, she answers. She said, your old mentor is planning 4 lectures on a single rose. Come check whether he's lost his mind. So, have you? Not yet, Julian says. I'm just trying to understand why this rose won't let me walk away. Laura stands beside him and looks at the painting. She tilts her head slightly, as if listening. It's a bit scary, she says. Too perfect. Like those people who always have the right phrase, the right smile, the perfect resume. And behind them, something broken they never show. The hit lands cleanly. Julian thinks of his university biographies, books, prizes, conferences, positions. No mention of the night his daughter stopped talking to him. No line for the times he chose late-night essays over his wife's voice while she still had one for him. Maybe that's why I'm drawn to it, he says, trying to sound light. Perhaps it's the self-portrait I never wrote. Laura lifts one eyebrow. Careful, she says. If you talk too much about yourself, the university gets nervous. They prefer art when it's safely about other people. He laughs, because he knows she's right. She opens her notebook and shows him a page. I've been jotting ideas down, she says. One sentence is underlined. The rose is what the painter wants us to see. The cracks are what the painting could not hide. You could start there. He reads the line and feels as if someone has described not only the canvas, but his last 20 years. It's a good opening, he admits. Will you collaborate on the series? That depends, she says, closing the notebook. Are you going to stand up there in your usual high tower, or are you going to come down to the ground for once? She doesn't wait for his answer. She lets the question hang in the air between them. By the time Julian leaves the museum, the idea is no longer a maybe. There will be 4 evenings, 4 talks, 1 painting. The dean will be delighted. Exactly the kind of event that gives us prestige, he will say. Posters will go up. Students will whisper about it in hallways. Julian, for the first time in a long while, feels both energized and afraid. On the tram ride home, the city slides past in blurred lights. His reflection floats over everything. A serious man with good glasses and tired eyes. He could be anyone. He could be himself 20 years ago, if not for those new lines around his mouth. His phone buzzes. A message from his wife. "Are you coming home for dinner?" It sounds more like habit than hope. Years ago, that question meant, "I'm waiting for you." Now it means, "Tell me if I should reheat something." Higher in the thread, an older message he hasn't opened in days. His daughter's name? One line. "I need to talk to you, but I don't know if it's worth it." He could tap it right now. He could answer with "it is" or "call me" or simply "I'm here." He could get off at the next stop, sit on a bench, and let whatever conversation comes break him where it needs to. Instead, he opens a notes app.
Then he types as if he were already speaking to an unseen audience. This story begins with a rose, but it is not about flowers. It begins in a nearly empty museum on a winter afternoon when a professor who has spent his life explaining beauty realizes he can no longer look at his own life without something cracking inside him. He reads the sentence. He imagines a calm voice saying it out loud, carrying it through a dark room where people sit watching the image of that golden frame and its impossible flower. He adds one more line. Over 4 nights in front of the same painting, Julian Serra will try to explain beauty, power, time, and limits. What he does not yet know is that, in doing so, he will be forced to explain himself. He saves the file. There are no chapter numbers, no bullet points, just a man, a rose, and a problem. When he finally turns off the light and walks down the dark hallway to the bedroom, he pauses. He knows that soon he will stand on a stage and speak into a microphone about that painting. He also knows that every sentence will echo back at him, asking quietly, "And you? Where is the crack in your story?" In the bedroom, his wife is already asleep, turned away. He lies down carefully, staring at the ceiling. In the darkness behind his eyes, he sees the rose again, white, immaculate, wrapped in gold, held up by a damaged world of hairline fractures. The first chapter ends there, with a man drifting towards sleep, convinced he is preparing a series of talks about a work of art, unaware that the real restoration project waiting for him is his own. Chapter 2. The Lecture on Beauty. The auditorium lights dim just enough to hush the room. Screens on either side of the stage glow with the same image, the golden frame, the white rose, the cracked background. Outside, the campus hums with the noise of a normal evening. Inside, 100 people lean back in their seats, waiting for Julian Serra to begin. He clears his throat, more to steady himself than to get their attention. "If you came here tonight expecting 4 lectures about art history," he says, "I should warn you. This may end up being 4 nights about a midlife crisis instead." The line gets a soft ripple of laughter. He lets it breathe. It is safer to pretend the confession is a joke. On the main screen, the camera zooms gently toward the rose. "I met this painting a few weeks ago," he continues. "It hangs in a quiet gallery a little off the main route. No tourists crowd around it. There are no arrows on the floor leading to it, no audio guide number printed on the wall. It is officially a minor work by a minor painter. And yet, when I saw it, I felt the same thing you feel when someone says your name in a crowd." He walks slowly across the stage. The rose follows him on the screen, like an eye. "Look at it," he says. "A perfect flower frozen at the exact point where it is most beautiful. It will never wilt, never bruise, never drop a petal. For years I've taught my students that this is what art does. It rescues a moment from time. It takes something fragile and makes it endure. He lets the image fill the silence. The petals glow soft and sharp at once. What I rarely admitted, he says, is that this is also terrifying. Because if you freeze something at its most beautiful, you also freeze everything that came before it, and everything that will come after, out of sight. You create an illusion of completeness. You say here, this is the whole story. He stops near the front row, the rows towering behind him. Think about the pictures you keep of yourself, he says. The one you use on your resume. The one you chose as your profile picture. The family photo on the wall where everyone is smiling. Each one says, this is me. But it isn't. It's one petal. One moment. One angle that hides more than it shows. In the second row, a student nods almost too eagerly. Julian recognizes that look, the thrill of hearing an idea that feels both new and obvious. He remembers having that face once. When I first stood in front of this painting, he continues, I felt admiration, then envy, then something closer to shame. On the screen, the camera pulls back to show the entire composition, the rose, the gold, the fractured background. Because for most of my career, he says, I have chased this kind of perfection. In paintings, in books, in my own image. I polished my lectures until they shone. I chose words carefully, like petals. I presented my ideas framed in references and footnotes and clever quotes. I wanted to be, in my field, exactly what this flower is on the canvas. Immaculate, convincing, impossible to question at a glance. He lets that sit. Some people shift in their seats. A few write something down. I did this so well, he says quietly, that I began to confuse the image with the person. I started believing I was the photograph on the university website, the list of publications in my bio, the nice introduction at the beginning of an event like this. He hears in his own mind the dean's voice from earlier that day in the faculty lounge. You know, Sarah, we needed something strong to close the semester. Your name still draws people. This rose thing, it's perfect. A bit poetic, a bit philosophical. Very you, very you. Julian had smiled, nodded, accepted the compliment like a polished coin. He had not told the dean that in the quiet of his study, he sometimes struggles to believe there is a you left behind all the roles. On stage, he points toward the screen. So tonight, he says, we start with the rose, with beauty, with the polished image, because that is where most of us start when we think about art. And if we are honest, it is also where most of us start when we think about ourselves. He clicks a remote. A new slide appears, the same rose in black and white, the background and frame faded out, only the flower highlighted. Beauty, he says, is often described as harmony, proportion, balanced things that fit together so well we can't imagine them otherwise. But what if beauty is also a kind of lie? A necessary lie, perhaps, but a lie all the same. He walks as he talks, the rhythm of his own steps keeping the words flowing. When I met my wife, he says, I fell in love with an image of us. We were young. We worked hard. We went to galleries and argued about paintings and bought cheap wine to drink in our tiny kitchen. I had a picture in my head, no frame, no cracks, just the two of us, bright and unfinished. I never once imagined us sitting at opposite ends of a table, counting the minutes until we could politely say, "I'm tired. I'm going to bed." The audience goes very still. He has never spoken of his marriage on a stage before. He feels the air change. "Back then," he goes on, "I talked about beauty the way you talk about the future when you're 25, as something guaranteed, if only you keep moving toward it. I thought a beautiful life was the sum of beautiful moments." He looks up at the rose again. "This painting does something similar," he says. "It offers you an instant and says, 'Here, this is everything you need to know about this flower.' You do not see the bud, closed and uncertain. You do not see the decay. You do not see the dirt. It is a fantasy of completeness." He clicks again. Now the screen shows a montage of close-ups. The center of the flower, the edge of a petal, catching the light. "Here is the seductive part," he says. "If we only looked at this, we might be satisfied. We might write essays, give exams, curate exhibitions on this center alone. We might treat the whole painting or a whole life as if it were this one perfect moment." He looks out at the audience. For a second, he imagines his daughter sitting out there, arms crossed, skeptical eyes fixed on him. In reality, she is miles away, her message still waiting on his phone. But the phantom of her gaze is enough. "That is what I did with myself," he says. "I chose the version of me that looked most like this flower, composed, eloquent, successful. I showed that to students, colleagues, family. I hid the mess. I convinced myself that was honesty. It wasn't. It was curation." He tastes the word. It feels bitter. "And the danger of falling in love with this kind of beauty," he says, "is that anything that doesn't match it starts to feel like failure. The tired evenings, the awkward silences, the arguments you lose because you don't have the courage to fight for what matters, the unread messages from your own child." He stops, aware that he has walked closer to a line than he intended. There is a fine thread between vulnerability and indulgence. He does not want to break it. "So," he says, softening his voice, "let's step back for a moment." The screen returns to the full painting. Rose gold cracks frame. "Beauty is not the enemy," he says. "We need it. We seek it. It keeps us from drowning in chaos. But beauty becomes dangerous when we treat it as the whole truth instead of one part of it." He gestures toward the background. "Next time we meet," he says, "we'll talk about the gold, the frame, the wealth, the power that tells us which flowers are worthy of a museum and which ones wilt unseen. After that, we'll look at the cracks, at the ways time quietly writes its own story across every surface. And finally, we'll talk about the edge of the painting, where the world abruptly stops. We'll ask what happens to everything that doesn't fit inside." He lets the promise hang there, a simple map. "But tonight," he continues, "I want to leave you with a small, uncomfortable question." He steps closer to the image of the rose until his silhouette interrupts the projection. His dark outline cuts through the white petals. "When you think about your own life," he says, "what is the picture you show the world? What is your version of this flower polished, composed, endlessly presentable? And what have you pushed out of the frame so it doesn't disturb the composition?" He looks around the room. No one speaks, but he feels the answers shifting inside them. He thinks about his wife at home, probably washing dishes while the TV rambles in the background. He thinks about his daughter, wondering whether it is worth trying to call again. He thinks about Laura, who is now sitting in the back row, watching him with that mix of admiration and quiet challenge. Their eyes meet for a moment. She does not smile, but she nods, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "This is a start." Julian turns back to the audience. "The first time I stood in front of this painting," he says, "I thought I was looking at a beautiful object. Now I suspect I was looking at a question I had been avoiding for years." He takes a breath. "Over the next 3 nights," he concludes, "we'll keep asking it from different angles. Tonight I invite you to go home and look at whatever image you use to say, 'This is me,' a photo, a bio, a story you tell at parties, and ask yourself what it leaves out." He lets the silence settle. Then he says simply, "Thank you for listening to a lecture on beauty that was really a lecture on hiding." Applause rises, polite at first, then stronger. Lights come up. People reach for their coats. Conversations start in low tones. Some students head for the exit, others linger near the stage. Lavra waits until the first wave has passed. She walks down the aisle and stops at the edge of the platform. "You know," she says, "for someone who always claims to dislike confessional work, you just bared quite a lot." He smiles, tired. "It wasn't planned," he says. The words slipped. "They didn't slip," she replies. "You finally let them out." She taps the notebook against her thigh. "Be careful," she adds. "If you keep being this honest, people will start believing you're human." He gives a short laugh. "That would ruin everything," he says. But the joke lands differently this time. It doesn't sound clever. It sounds like a defense he no longer fully believes in. Later that night, alone in his apartment, the echoes of the applause fade. The glow of the projector has been replaced by the cold light of the refrigerator. His wife has already gone to bed. In the quiet kitchen, Julian pours himself a glass of water and stares at his phone on the table. The message from his daughter is still there. "I need to talk to you, but I don't know if it's worth it." He thinks of the question he left with the audience. What have you pushed out of the frame? He knows the answer. He picks up the phone, hesitates, and for a second his thumb hovers over the screen. Call. Write. Say something. Anything. Instead, he opens the email from the university with the subject line, "Congratulations on tonight's lecture." He skims the praise, the talk of strong turnout and great start to the series. The words are smooth, flattering, easy to swallow. His daughter's message waits, unseen, one line below. Julian sets the phone down. On his desk in the next room, the image of the rose waits in a slide deck for the next lecture, glowing faintly on a sleeping screen. Its petals are flawless. Its world is already cracking. The second chapter ends there, with a man applauded for his honesty in public, still unable to answer the one message that could break the frame of his carefully arranged life. Chapter 3. Between Dishes and Cracks. The morning after the lecture on beauty, the applause feels like a dream that doesn't quite survive daylight. Julian wakes before the alarm, eyes already open in the gray half-light. For a moment he lies still, listening. The house has its own quiet noises. The refrigerator's hum, a pipe ticking, a car passing far away. Beside him, his wife breathes evenly, turned toward the edge of the bed. He studies the curve of her back, the way the blanket rises and falls. He used to watch her sleep with a kind of wonder. Now he watches with a question. When did the space between them become part of the furniture? The alarm finally cuts in, cheerful and intrusive. She reaches out, turns it off, and swings her legs out of bed without looking at him. "Morning," he says. "Morning," she answers, neutral as weather. In the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgles. The smell is warm and familiar, almost enough to make the room feel friendly. She moves with practiced efficiency, cup, spoon, sugar, while he stands there, half in the way. "How was it?" she asks, eyes on the sugar jar. "How was what?" "The lecture," she says. "The one about the rose. People have been talking about it in the group chat from the department spouses." She puts quotation marks around spouses without moving her fingers. The word comes out tight. He pulls a mug from the cabinet. "It went well," he says. "Full auditorium. Good questions." "That's what I heard," she replies. "They said you were very personal." The word lands between them like a misdelivered package. He stirs his coffee, watching the swirl of brown against white porcelain. "I mentioned us," he admits. "A little." She looks up at him for the first time that morning. "You mentioned us," she repeats. "In front of 100 people. It wasn't details," he says quickly. "More like the idea of us. I was talking about how we curate our lives, how we show only the beautiful parts." "The beautiful parts," she echoes. "Did you tell them how we schedule our arguments now so they don't overlap with your conferences?" He winces. "No," he says. "I didn't." "Pity," she says. "That would have been a great example." Silence stretches thin between them. He wants to say something kind, something that might open a crack in this wall they keep repainting. Instead, he hears himself choosing the safe sentence. "I didn't use your name," he adds, as if that helps. "Oh, good," she says. "That makes me feel so much better." She rinses her cup and sets it in the rack with more force than necessary. "Your daughter called," she says, back still turned. "You were out." His heart stumbles. "When?" he asks. "During your grand confession, I suppose." She opens the fridge, leans in as if reading labels is suddenly fascinating. She didn't leave a message. She just said she'd try again later, which we both know she won't. He closes his eyes briefly. "I saw her text," he says. "I meant to." "Meant to is your favorite tense," his wife interrupts. She straightens up, closes the fridge, and finally looks at him properly. "You meant to come home earlier, you meant to be there for her first recital, you meant to talk to her after everything. You mean very well, Julian. You just don't do very much." The words are not shouted. They are spoken with the precision of someone who has rehearsed them alone many times. He grips the edge of the counter. "I'm trying," he says, hating how weak it sounds. "Then try where it matters," she replies. "Not in front of strangers sitting in the dark." She picks up her bag, slings it over her shoulder, and pauses at the doorway. "By the way," she says without turning around, "Laura wrote me after the lecture." That takes him a second. "She wrote you?" "Apparently she found my email in some old list," his wife says. "She wanted to tell me how beautifully brave you were on stage." The phrase drips with borrowed admiration. "It seems the whole campus is very impressed with your honesty." She shrugs slightly. "Maybe one day you'll try it at home," she says and leaves. The front door clicks shut. The apartment goes very quiet. Julian stands in the kitchen with his half-finished coffee, watching the ripples settle. The compliment in Laura's mouth, relayed through his wife's, tastes like accusation. He picks up his phone. The screen lights up. There's no new message from his daughter. He scrolls to her name. His thumb hovers over the call button. He imagines her phone buzzing somewhere on a desk, in a pocket, under a pillow. He imagines her seeing his name, deciding in a split second whether to accept or let it ring out. He presses the button. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. On the 5th, the call goes to voicemail. Her recorded voice, younger than she is now, says, "Hey, it's Ana. Leave something useful." He doesn't leave anything. He hangs up because every sentence that comes to mind sounds like a lecture, not a father. He spends the afternoon in his office on campus, surrounded by books that used to comfort him. Today they feel like walls. Titles about aesthetics, perception, representation stared down from the shelves. He opens one at random, reads a paragraph about the gaze, and laughs under his breath at the irony. His inbox is full of reactions to the lecture. "Powerful talk last night, Professor. Never thought you'd get so personal. Loved it. Any chance you'll publish this series?" He answers with brief thanks, polite and distant. Each email is a small applause replay. None of them help him dial his daughter again. As evening approaches, he finds himself walking not to the auditorium, not to his office, but back to the museum. The guard at the entrance nods. Julian has become a regular. The familiar smell of old paintings wraps around him. He takes the now familiar path to the quiet gallery where the rose hangs. There it is. In this light, the gold seems slightly softer, the cracks a little deeper. He stands in front of the painting, the way some people stand before an altar. "You caused a mess," he tells it under his breath. The rose does not answer, of course. It never does. But being here is easier than being anywhere else. He thinks of his next lecture about the gold and power. The script begins to form in his mind, smooth and clever and dangerously safe. Talk about museums, he tells himself. About who gets to be on the wall. About whose stories get framed. Then another thought pushes through, quieter, less comfortable. Talk about who gets your time. About whose calls you return. He closes his eyes. Footsteps enter the gallery. Light, quick, familiar. "You know," Lavra says from behind him, "most people only visit their subjects during opening hours." He doesn't turn around right away. "Most people choose less demanding subjects," he says. She comes to stand beside him. They look at the painting together, like two people staring at a problem they can't quite solve. "How are you?" she asks. He considers lying. Then he remembers her note about cracks. "I'm exposed," he says. "Like the varnish has been scraped off." "That's what you get for talking like a human being," she says. Dangerous habit. He lets out a breath that is almost a laugh. "Apparently I was very personal," he says. "My wife informed me this morning." She did not mean it as a compliment. Lavra glances at him. "Did you expect she would?" She asks. "You've spent years giving your best stories to rooms full of strangers. Suddenly she learns you have words for what is happening, and you choose to unveil them on stage instead of at the table. If I were her, I'd be conflicted." He winces. "You emailed her," he says. "I did," Lavra answers. I wanted her to know that what you did was important. Important, he repeats. That's one word for it. She has others. She's allowed, Laura says. They stand in silence. On the canvas, the rose refuses to wilt. Have you called Ana? Lavra asks eventually. He stiffens. She called last night, he says. I missed it. And? She prompts. And I called back, he says. It went to voicemail. And? She says again. And I hung up. She sighs softly. You're very good at starting, she says. Less good at staying in the uncomfortable middle. He almost snaps back that this is not part of her job description. Instead, he finds himself asking a different question. Why do you care? He says. About me, my wife, my daughter. You could just attend the lectures, take notes, publish a paper about the Serra Rose cycle in some journal, and move on. Lara keeps her eyes on the painting. Because you were my teacher, she says simply. You taught me that art only matters if we let it change the way we live. If I watch you pour all this into the microphone and then keep living exactly the same way, then everything you taught me was a lie. And I don't want it to be a lie. He swallows. That's a heavy expectation, he says. That's what happens when you become someone's moral reference by accident, she replies. You don't get to pick when they apply your lessons to you. They are both quiet for a while. Finally, she says more gently, Look, I'm not asking you to fix 25 years of family history before the next lecture. I'm just saying, if you're going to talk about power and gold and who gets framed, maybe start by deciding whose presence you are willing to stand in without hiding behind ideas. Her gaze leaves the painting and lands on him. For example, she adds, your daughter's. Something in his chest shifts, like a door not quite opening, but no longer fully closed. That night, back in his apartment, the day plays back in fragments. His wife's calm anger, his own silent phone call, Laura's unwavering eyes in front of the painting. He heats leftover food, sits at the table alone, and stares at the empty chair opposite him. His lecture draft waits on his laptop. The title line reads, Gold and Power, the Frame of Value. The outline is neat, safe, clever. He deletes the title. In its place he types, who gets to be inside the frame, and who do we keep just outside it? He watches the words blink on the screen. Then he does something small and terrifying. He picks up his phone again, scrolls to his daughter's name, and this time, instead of calling, he writes, Ana, he types. I saw your message. It is worth it. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a lecture, so I'll just say it clumsily. I messed up. A lot. If you are willing, I'd like to listen. No speeches. Just you. He stares at the text for a long time. His thumb hesitates over the send button. His heart beats too loudly for a quiet kitchen. He presses send. There is no immediate reply. The message sits there, gray and small. He closes his eyes. The silence in the room feels thinner somehow. Less like a wall, more like a pause. On the desk, the slide with the rose still glows faintly. Julian walks over and looks at it one more time before shutting the laptop. You win, he tells the painting on the screen. You wanted cracks. Here they are. Chapter 3 ends there, with a man standing in a dim room, obligations piling up around him, having done nothing visibly heroic, no big speech, No dramatic reunion, but having taken one fragile, necessary step toward the part of his life he has kept just outside. Chapter 4, Gold and Power. On the night of the second lecture, the auditorium feels different. Word has spread. The seats fill earlier, not with the restless shuffling of students checking their phones, but with the quiet buzz of people who expect something to happen. Some are here for art, some for gossip, some because a friend said, "You have to hear this professor. He talks like he's taking himself apart." Behind the curtain, Julian stands alone, the remote for the projector cold in his hand. In his pocket, his phone is a small, heavy rectangle. One new message glows on the screen. "Ana, I'm not promising anything, but I'm listening." Just that. No greeting, no emoji, no forgiveness. It is more than he has had in months. He reads it 3 times and locks the phone and tucks it away. His heart is beating too fast for a man about to talk about frames and funding. A technician sticks their head in. 2 minutes, Professor." He nods. On the screens, the familiar painting appears. The golden frame, the white rose, the cracked background. Tonight, the camera lingers on the gold, gleaming under the lights. He steps out into the dim auditorium. The murmur dies down. He feels the eyes, the expectation, the invisible weight of what he said last time. "Good evening," he says. His voice sounds steadier than he feels. Last week we talked about the rose, about beauty, about the image we like to present to the world. Tonight we're going to talk about everything that holds that image up. The slide zooms out to show the full frame. The gold curls and ornaments almost choke the edges of the painting. "Gold," he says. "Power." The frame. He walks slowly, letting the words find their rhythm. "When you walk into a museum," he continues, "you are not just looking at paintings. You are looking at decisions. Someone decided which works deserved walls, light, temperature control, little plaques with names and dates. Someone decided which stories counted as culture, and which stayed in attics or were painted over, or never got painted at all." He gestures toward the projection. "This frame is not neutral," he says. "It is loud. It announces itself before you even see the rose. It says whatever is inside me matters." He pauses. "In my world," he adds, "we have our own frames, titles, degrees, awards, journals that count and journals that don't really count, introductions that start with distinguished and renowned. These are not useless. They can be earned, sometimes even deserved. But they also do something else. They tell the room before you open your mouth, 'Listen to this person. They are important.'" He hears a faint rustle in the back rows. He knows some of his colleagues are there, their bodies wrapped in invisible frames. "Let me tell you a small, unpleasant memory," he says. "When my daughter was 8, she drew a picture she was very proud of. It was a crooked house with a tree that looked suspiciously like a cloud, and 3 stick figures holding hands in front of it. She brought it to me and said, 'Look, Papa, it's us.'" He sees faces soften in the crowd. This is safe territory, nostalgic, sweet. I glanced at it, smiled, and said, "Because I was tired and because my mind was elsewhere, that's nice, honey." Then I went back to revising an article. He lets the sweetness die. 2 days later, he continues, the article was accepted by a prestigious journal. I celebrated. I printed out the email. I framed it and hung it in my office. The drawing went on the fridge for a while under a magnet, then disappeared in a stack of school papers. He looks up at the image of the golden frame. Guess which one my daughter remembers more clearly. The auditorium is very quiet now. This is how power works in small, domestic ways, he says. I wrapped my professional words in a gold frame. I hung them on a wall people visit. I treated her drawing like something temporary. I didn't intend to say my work matters more than you, but that's what the frame said for me. He clicks. The slide splits. On one side, the painting and its ornate frame. On the other, a simple piece of paper with a child's drawing, photographed on a fridge door. Gold, he says, is anything that makes us visible, valuable, real in the eyes of the world. It can be actual money. It can be status, followers, grades, likes. It can be the approval of a small group whose opinion we have elevated above all others. He walks closer to the audience. The danger is not the gold itself, he says. The danger is that once we step into that frame, we start measuring everything else by how close it gets to us. Who deserves our attention? Who deserves our time? Who deserves to be invited into the picture? He thinks of Anna's message waiting in his pocket. I'm listening. In the case of this painting, he says, someone decided it deserved a frame this extravagant. Maybe the patron was rich. Maybe the painter insisted. Maybe it was added later by a dealer who thought it would sell better. What matters is the signal it sends. This is important. This is worth your gaze, your time, your silence. He stops near the front row. Ask yourself, he says quietly, who in your life gets that signal from you? Who gets the best of your attention? Who gets your patience? Who gets your careful listening? And who is treated like background noise, like a scribbled drawing on a fridge, like something you'll get to later? He hears his wife's voice in his memory. You mean very well, Julian. You just don't do very much. He inhales. In my case, he says, I gave my students gold frames. I gave my colleagues gold frames. I gave my ideas gold frames. I wrapped them in time and effort and late nights. I traveled long distances to talk to strangers about paintings. Meanwhile, at home, I lived as if the people closest to me would always be there, even if I barely stepped into their picture. He shrugs lightly, a gesture that cannot hide the weight. I am telling you this not because confession is fashionable, he says, but because if I only talked about museums and markets, this would be a safe lecture. And I promised myself, standing in front of that rose, that I would try to do something more dangerous. He clicks again. Now the slide zooms in on the top corner of the frame, a swirl of gold leaf, slightly worn at the edges. Gold wears out, he says. Frames tarnish. Trends change. Titles lose their shine. The applause moves on to the next person. When that happens, what remains? He lets the question hang, then answers softly. Whatever you gave your real attention to. He paces slowly, thinking as he speaks. There is a concept in art, he says, called negative space. It's everything that isn't the subject. The air around the figure. The parts that appear empty but give shape to what we see. I have begun to suspect that power works the same way. We notice the gold, the frame, the spotlights. We rarely notice the quiet absences that make them possible. He looks out at the faces. The hours not spent with your child so you could finish a paper. The dinners eaten in silence because your mind was still on stage. The friends you stopped calling because they didn't fit into the story you were building. He hears a cough somewhere, then silence again. Tonight, he says, I am not asking you to renounce your ambitions or to pretend status doesn't matter. I still enjoy a good introduction. I still feel a small, shameful thrill when a room fills because my name is on a poster. A few people smile. They understand that too well. What I am asking, he continues, is that you notice who is standing just outside your frame and ask yourself why. He glances toward the back. He cannot see clearly, but he imagines Lavra there, pen in hand, watching whether his practice matches his preaching. He imagines Aina somewhere in another city, maybe not watching, but holding his message in her phone like something fragile and suspicious. This painting, he says, will always hang in a frame that tells you it is worthy. Your life is not so simple. Nobody will build a gold border around the people who need you. You will have to choose again and again where you place your gaze. He stops. For a moment he feels a strange quiet inside himself, like the moment between breaths. My own frame, he says finally, is under renovation. There's a gentle murmur of laughter, not mocking but warm. He takes it as permission to go on. After our last lecture, he says, I received many messages about how brave it was to be honest on stage. It took me 3 days to answer one message from my daughter, who simply wrote, I'm listening. He does not embellish it. He lets the simplicity carry its own weight. I don't know yet what will come of that conversation, he says. I am not telling you a success story. I am telling you that in the quiet after the applause, the frames fall away, and you are left with a raw, unframed question. Who did I show up for? He looks up at the painting one more time. Next time, he says, we will look at the cracks, the slow work of time, the stories we try to paint over. But before we do, I invite you to walk through your own museum. Look at the frames you have built. Ask where you have hung your attention, your kindness, your listening. And ask who is still waiting in the hallway, holding a drawing you never really saw. He clicks the remote. The lights soften. The golden frame fades into black. Thank you, he says, for giving me your time tonight. I am trying to learn how to give mine back where it matters. The applause rises again, not as loud as the first night, but deeper. Some people stand. Some stay seated, thoughtful, hands unmoving. Afterward, the lobby fills with a low roar of post-lecture talk. Students argue about museums and class and privilege. A couple in their 50s speaks quietly about their grown children. Someone says he's going through something in the tone usually reserved for weather or wars. Julian shakes hands, answers questions, smiles. He does it automatically, like a dancer repeating steps learned long ago. Lara finds him near the coat rack. Good, she says without preamble. You didn't hide behind theory. I tried, he answers. Theory is much more cooperative than real people. She studies his face. You look tired, she says. Thank you, he replies. That's the most honest compliment I've had in years. They walk toward the exit together. Outside, the night air is cold and clean. Did she write back? Lavra asks. He nods. She said she's listening, he says. That's a start, Lavra answers. Don't narrate it. Just be there when she speaks. He smiles, wry. No metaphors, he says. No references, no quotations. Exactly, she says. All your worst habits. They part at the corner. Julian walks home slower than usual. The campus lights shrink behind him. Each step sounds loud in his ears. In the kitchen, the apartment is dim. A single lamp over the stove casts a small circle of yellow. His wife sits at the table with a book open, glasses perched low on her nose. "How was power?" she asks without looking up. "Complicated," he says. "As usual." She closes the book, marks the page, and finally lifts her eyes to him. "Did you talk to her?" she asks. "I sent a message," he says. She answered. She says she's willing to listen. A brief, flickering softness crosses his wife's face, then disappears under years of caution. "Good," she says. "Don't make it another performance." He nods. He has already heard that warning tonight, in other words. Later, in his study, he opens his laptop, then closes it again. For once, the temptation to turn life into material is smaller than the desire to simply sit with it. He takes out his phone, opens Ana's message, and reads it once more. "I'm not promising anything, but I'm listening." He types back, "I understand. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." No lectures? He hits send, then places the phone face down on the desk. On the wall above him, his framed diplomas and awards watch in their silent gold and glass. He imagines very clearly taking them down, one by one, and leaning them against the floor, leaving the wall blank. Not to erase his past, but to make space for something unframed. The fourth chapter closes there, a man sitting in a small, quiet room, beginning to understand that power is not only in the gold that surrounds him, but in the choice of where and with whom he spends the limited, invisible currency of his attention. Chapter 5, Cracks in Time. 2 days pass before Ana calls. It happens in the worst possible moment, and the only one that makes sense. Late afternoon, when the light in Julian's office turns everything the color of old paper. He is staring at the slide for his next lecture, an extreme close-up of the painting's cracked background, when his phone vibrates on the desk. For a second, he assumes it's another email, another reminder, another calendar alert. Then he sees her name, Ana. His hand hesitates over the screen, as if the glass might burn him. He answers on the third ring, afraid that waiting longer will translate as indifference. "Hi," he says. It comes out too fast, too formal, like he's picking up a work call. There is a small silence on the other end, the size of a held breath. "Hi," she says. Her voice is lower than he remembers, roughened by years he did not witness up close. The last clear memory he has of her voice is from a graduation ceremony, shouting his name from the bleachers, while he pretended not to be embarrassed. Now there is a distance in it that no microphone could fix. "Thank you for calling," he says. "I almost didn't," she answers. "I stared at your message for a day. I thought he's going to turn this into a speech. He feels the hit and accepts it. I'll try not to," he says. "If I start lecturing, you can hang up." There's a faint huff of something that might be a laugh. "I might," she says. "So, you said you wanted to listen." "I do," he says. Then he shuts his mouth, as if physically restraining the words that line up behind his teeth, explanations, excuses, carefully arranged context. She fills the silence. "You know what I remember most clearly?" she asks. Not the big fights. Not even the divorce. I remember the little times you weren't there and everybody acted like you were. He closes his eyes. The cracked background of the slide glows on his laptop screen. Like what? He says. Like my school play, she says. 4th grade. You were supposed to come. Mom kept saying, he's just running late. He'll appear. The seat next to her stayed empty. Afterward, everyone asked, did your dad see you? He loves theater, right? And I heard myself saying yes, he saw the rehearsal, just to make the story match the picture. He sees it, an empty chair, a small girl in a paper costume, a lie told to protect the man who wasn't there. I'm sorry, he says. The words are too small, but they are honest. You missed so many things, she continues, not cruelly, just listing facts. Birthdays, dinners, visits. You were always somewhere else talking about, I don't know, beautiful things, important things. Everyone told me you were doing something that mattered. I started wondering if I just didn't matter enough. He feels the crack widen. That was never true, he says quickly. You... Wait, she cuts in. This is the part where you usually explain. Just let me finish, okay? He bites down on the rest of the sentence. Okay, he says. I got tired, she says. Tired of hearing, he's busy. He's working, he's teaching people, he's writing a book. Tired of being the one who had to understand. So I stopped asking. I stopped calling. I thought, if he wants to be in my life, he'll come find me. He always finds time for the things he cares about. Another pause. He can hear traffic faintly in the background on her sidecar's distant city noise. A life going on without him. So when you didn't, she says, I figured that was my answer. He leans back in his chair. The ceiling above him has its own network of cracks, hairline fractures in the plaster. You're right, he says quietly. I trusted the story I had about myself more than I trusted your experience of me. I thought being a good person in general could compensate for being absent when it was specifically you. There is a small rustle, as if she's shifting the phone from one ear to the other. I watched your lecture online, she says suddenly. He startles. You did? Someone posted a clip, she says. You talking about the rose and the photo you show the world. Everybody in the comments was calling you brave and deep and all that. I just thought, wow, he can see cracks in a painting from 50 years ago, but it took him this long to see me. He winces. The cruelty of it is that she is not wrong. I deserve that, he says. Maybe worse. I didn't call to punish you, she says. If I wanted to do that, I'd just send you a link to everything you missed with a schedule attached. He almost smiles. Thank you for not doing that, he says. I called because when you said no lectures, just you, it felt different, she says. And I wanted to see if you meant it. I do, he says. And I also know that meaning it isn't enough. I have to show up repeatedly, not just when I'm feeling guilty or after a dramatic monologue in front of strangers. She doesn't answer right away. When she does, her voice is quieter. So what now? She asks. You say sorry, I say it's okay, and we pretend the last 10 years were a technical glitch. No, he says. I'm not asking you to erase anything. I know we can't go back to you being 8 and me hanging your drawing on the wall like it deserved. He swallows. But maybe, he says, we can start from here. Tiny steps. Coffee next week if you're willing. Or just more calls like this where you get to talk. And I practice shutting up. That gets a real small laugh. That would be new, she says. I know, he says. There's a long, fragile moment where either of them could retreat. Okay, she says at last. I'm not promising anything, but we can try coffee. Neutral territory. Somewhere with a back exit in case you start quoting philosophers at me. I'll leave my bibliography at home, he says. I'll believe it when I see it, she replies. They end the call a few minutes later, not with grand declarations, but with the awkward, hopeful logistics of real people. Day, time, place. When the line goes dead, Julian realizes his heart is pounding, as if he has just stepped off a stage. He sits in the quiet of his office, phone on the desk, hand still slightly trembling. On the laptop screen, the slide with the cracked background waits. He studies it with new eyes. The cracks are thin and irregular, spreading like a fragile map. Some are barely visible. Others cross the surface like fine lightning scars. The paint is held, but only just. He remembers a line he once read. Time doesn't destroy things. It reveals how they were put together. He thinks of his own life, the way he fused work and worth, applause and affection, until the structure could not hold. The way Anna learned to stop expecting him. The way his wife started speaking to him like someone clearing out a house, room by room. That evening, when he takes the stage for the third lecture, he does not feel like an expert. He feels like a man walking across thin ice that he once insisted was solid ground. The auditorium darkens. The painting appears again, filling the screen. This time the camera ignores the rose in the frame. It dives straight into the background, into the web of cracks. Tonight, he begins, we are going to talk about time. He lets the words sink in. Not as an abstract concept, he adds, but as something that leaves marks. On paintings, on buildings, on faces, on relationships. The slide zooms closer. The cracks grow. When a painting cracks like this, he explains, we call it crackler. It can come from age, from changes in temperature, from the way the materials were mixed. Sometimes restorers see it as a flaw to be hidden. Sometimes they see it as a record to be respected. He walks slowly. I used to think of my own life as something I could keep smooth if I just tried hard enough. If I managed my time, if I said the right things, if I avoided certain conflicts. I thought cracks were failures, proof that I had done something wrong. He glances at the blown-up image of the paint fractures. Lately, he says, I've begun to suspect they are just proof that time has passed, that something has existed long enough to be stressed. He tells them about crackler patterns, indicating different eras, different techniques. The audience listens, some scribbling notes, some simply watching the veins on the screen. Then he veers off the safe path again. I want to show you another kind of crack, he says. The slide changes. On one side, the same fractured background. On the other, a photograph, a family picture taken years ago. 3 people on a couch, smiling, eyes slightly tired. At first glance, it looks ordinary. But Julian has drawn a faint, almost invisible line splitting the space between him and his daughter. In this photo, he says, everything looks intact. We are sitting close together. We're smiling. But if I could show you the sound that went with this image, you'd hear silence. A silence full of things that were not being said. He swallows. Cracks don't always show on the surface, he says. Sometimes they show in who stops speaking, who stops asking, who stops expecting. He does not detail his call with Aina. That belongs to them. But he lets the shadow of it color every word. I say this, he tells them, because it is tempting, when we look at a painting like this, to think of the cracks as purely aesthetic. Interesting, maybe even beautiful, in the way ruin can be beautiful. But each fracture is also a record of stress, of expansion and contraction, of heat and cold, of the world pressing on the surface again and again. He looks out at the crowd. Each of us is carrying our own pattern of crackler, he says. Some lines we show, some we hide under makeup or jokes or work or carefully managed distance. He takes a breath. Yesterday, he says, my daughter told me that as a child she lied for me. She told people I had seen things I had missed. She filled in my absences with stories that made sense of the image she had of me. That is a kind of crack, to a tiny fracture between reality and the story we tell ourselves to survive it. He feels the room tighten around him. I can't go back and stop those cracks from forming, he says. I can only decide what to do with them now. Pretend they're not there, paint over them, smooth them, deny them, or look at them closely and say yes. This is where it hurt. This is where the structure was weaker than I wanted to admit. He gestures to the painting. Restorers have a choice, he says. They can fill in the lines, retouch them, make the surface look new. Or they can leave them, stabilize the canvas so it doesn't fall apart, but allow the cracks to remain as testimony. He allows a small, tentative smile. Tonight, he says, I am voting for testimony. He closes the formal part of the talk by returning to the painting. The camera slowly pulls back, cracks, rose gold frame. Next time, he tells them, we'll talk about the edge. The frame. What gets included? What stays outside? But for now, I want to leave you with this. If you find yourself tracing the fractures in your life, resist the urge to call them ruin too quickly. Sometimes they're just the evidence that something has been here long enough to matter. Applause comes, softer but steady. It feels less like a wave crashing on a shore and more like rain on a roof. Afterward, Julian slips out of the auditorium faster than usual. He answers fewer questions, smiles less. The speech is still in his bones. He needs quiet. Outside, the night is cool. The campus lights blur. His phone buzzes in his pocket. Aina, that thing you said about cracks and silence? I think I get it. He stops under a tree, the branches overhead a dark lace against the sky. He types back, I'm still learning, but I'm listening. Her reply comes a minute later. Me too, she writes. See you for coffee. Chapter 5 rests there, between a lecture hall and a future meeting in some ordinary cafe, with a man who has finally stopped pretending that cracks only happen to paintings, and a daughter who has agreed, cautiously, to meet him in the unfinished middle of their shared canvas. Chapter 6. Her, the former student. Laura Vidal is the kind of person who notices when a room changes temperature. She sits near the back of the auditorium as Julian's third lecture ends, not because she is shy, but because the back is where you feel the mood of a crowd most clearly. From here she can see the way people shift in their seats, the way some lean forward when he mentions his daughter, the way others fold their arms when he hints at his own failures. When the applause fades, she doesn't go down to the front this time. She closes her notebook, slips it into her bag, and waits until most of the audience has drifted out in clusters. Only then does she stand, stretch her stiff legs, and leave through a side door. Outside, the night smells like wet concrete and distant fried food from a truck parked near the quad. She pulls her scarf tighter around her neck and starts walking home, boots clicking on the pavement. As she walks, the lecture replays in her mind not as a series of arguments, but as a series of moments where his voice almost broke and then didn't. She remembers a different voice. Miss Vidal, he had said years ago, when she was 19 and terrified and pretending not to be. Your paper on Caravaggio is brilliant and completely insufferable. Please choose which one you want it to be next time. She had laughed, mortified and flattered in the same instant. That was the first time she realized she wanted not just to impress him, but to argue with him forever. Back then he was all sharp edges and assurance. Every lecture was a performance. Every answer, a quotation wrapped in wit. Students followed him out of classrooms like he was a walking bibliography. She followed him because under all the polish, she saw something else, a genuine hunger to understand why beauty hurt as much as it healed. She didn't tell him that, of course. She told him he misread a painting once, just to see what would happen. He had stared at her, surprised, then smiled. Good, he had said. Somebody has to keep me honest. Years later, she wonders when he stopped expecting anyone to keep him honest. The next morning, an email pings into her inbox while she's stirring sugar into her coffee. From department chair? Subject: guest position discussion. She reads it quickly. The university might have a long-term slot for her, a real contract, not just visiting and adjunct, those words that mean half belonging. There's talk of budget, of committees, of our evolving needs. There is also, in the second paragraph, a line, of course your close collaboration with Professor Serra is a strong factor in your favor. She puts the spoon down a little too hard. Coffee splashes the counter. There it is, the gold frame. Even when the opportunity is about her, his name glittering around it. She rinses the spoon, wipes the counter, and lets herself feel irritated for a moment, not at him exactly, but at the way the institution keeps tying her future to his shadow. She remembers the first time that shadow fell in the wrong direction. It was at a conference in another city. She was 26, fresh from defending her dissertation, invited to present on a panel he chaired. They had spent weeks emailing back and forth about her paper, cutting paragraphs, strengthening arguments, sharpening transitions. He pushed her hard, but always with that underlying respect that made the effort feel worth it. The night before her talk, they ended up in the hotel bar with a group of academics. Wine flowed more freely than wisdom. At some point, people drifted away, leaving the two of them at a small table by the window. You know, one colleague had said as he left, clapping Julian on the shoulder, "You've trained her well. She sounds just like you." The comment lodged in her ribs. When they were alone, she'd said, half joking, half pleading, I hope I don't sound just like you. I'm trying very hard to sound like myself. Julian, slightly drunk, had smiled. Sometimes sounding like someone else is how we learn who we are, he'd replied. Then he'd looked at her for a moment too long. Not in a predatory way, in a way that made something in her tilt. She remembered thinking, this is dangerous territory. So she made a joke, diffused the moment, and went up to her room alone. The next day she gave her paper, got good questions, received polite praise. On the plane back, she went over her notes and decided to file that night under things that almost happened and probably shouldn't. Now, as she wipes coffee off the counter, she wonders how much of his current crisis has its roots in all those almosts, all the moments when he chose the stage over the kitchen table, the audience over the phone call, the flattering colleague over the uncomfortable conversation at home. She could, she knows, walk away, take her talent, her degrees, her potential contract, and build a career with enough distance that his collapse doesn't splash her. It would be safer, cleaner. Instead, she finds herself typing to Julian Serra. Subject: cracks. Your lecture last night was difficult to watch, she writes. In a good way. You're cutting closer to the bone. Don't stop now. Also, the department is considering me for a permanent position. Apparently, your glow is still contagious. Try not to implode before the committee meets. I'd rather not have to find another mentor to disappoint me. She hesitates, then deletes the last sentence. Too sharp. She rewrites, I'd rather succeed next to someone who's busy telling the truth than behind someone pretending to be whole. She hits send before she can overthink it. That afternoon, they meet by accident or almost by accident in the campus cafe. She's at a corner table, grading papers, when he walks in, scanning for an empty seat. Their eyes meet. There is a flicker of that old teacher-student recognition. Ah, you again. Do you mind? He asks, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Depends, she says. Are you going to grade my life while I grade these essays? I'm off duty, he says. Mostly. He sits. The cafe is half full, filled with the low hum of laptops and espresso machines. Outside, students cross the quad like colorful particles, drifting in and out of each other's orbits. I got your email, he says, about the position. Congratulations. It's not official yet, she says. I'm still a provisional idea. They'd be idiots not to make it official, he replies. She raises an eyebrow. Careful, she says. Your endorsement is a double-edged sword these days. That bad? He asks, almost amused. She studies him. The last weeks have carved new lines around his eyes, but there is also a looseness in his shoulders she hasn't seen before. Like someone who has stopped holding his breath all the time. That honest, she says. Students are divided between worshiping you and diagnosing you. That sounds about right, he says. She taps her pen against a paragraph on the page in front of her. You know what I wanted when I was your student? She says. Beyond good grades and clever comments, he leans back. Enlighten me, he says. I wanted you to be the proof that it was possible, she says. That you could love art and ideas and still have a real life. That you didn't have to choose between being brilliant and being present. He looks down at his hands. And now? He asks. Now I see that you're proof of something else, she says. that brilliance without presence collapses eventually. That's useful too, just more painful to watch up close. He exhales slowly. I never wanted to be a cautionary tale, he says. No one does, she answers. But we don't always get to pick what we are for other people. She sets the pen down. I emailed your wife because I was angry, she admits. Angry that she only ever saw the version of you that came home late and empty, while the rest of us got the sparkling, insightful professor. I wanted her to know that the man she was losing was also the man we admired. It felt unfair. He blinks. I didn't know you were angry, he says. Of course you didn't, she replies. You were busy being admirable. He laughs once, sharp. Fair point, he says. They sit in that for a moment. You could leave, he says suddenly. Get a better offer somewhere else. You're talented. You don't need to stay tied to my unraveling. She shrugs. Maybe I'm stubborn, she says. Maybe I want to see if you can actually do what you've been telling all of us to do for years. Let art change the way you live. He smiles, but there's no defense in it. I'm trying, he says. I talked to Anna. We're meeting for coffee. Laura's expression softens just a little. That's good, she says. Don't make the cafe your new stage. I'll order a drink and not monologue about its cultural significance, he says. Scout's honor. You were never a scout, she says. You're right, he admits. I was too busy reading footnotes. She laughs. The sound surprises them both. Look, she says, leaning in a little. Here's the thing, Julian. You're not the center of my life. I have my own work, my own mess, my own future to worry about. But you are part of the story I tell myself about how to be in this field. And I would rather that story not end with he burned everything down and disappeared into his theories. He nods slowly. I don't want that ending either, he says. Good, she says. So keep going. Keep standing in front of that ridiculous rose and saying the things you're afraid to hear yourself say. But also, she taps the table with each word. Call your daughter back. Apologize to your wife even when you're tired. Answer fewer emails. Say no to some of the invites that make you feel important. Let your students see you leave the building at a reasonable hour once in a while. You're giving me homework, he says. Consider it a group project, she replies. Your life and your work finally in the same document. He makes a face. I hate group projects, he says. She smiles. I know, she says. That's why you need this one. They part ways at the cafe door. She goes left toward a small apartment with books piled on the floor and rent that eats half her paycheck. He goes right toward an office full of framed evidence that he has mattered. On his way, he passes the museum. He almost keeps walking. Instead, he turns in. The guard nods, already accustomed to his unannounced visits. The gallery is quiet at this hour. Students rarely come in the middle of the week. Tourists prefer the blockbuster show downstairs. The rose waits, surrounded by its gold. The cracks in the background look deeper than ever. Or maybe he finally sees them for what they are. You're gathering quite a cast, he tells the painting softly. My wife, my daughter, Lavra, the chair of the department. 100 strangers in a dark hall, all orbiting around you. He thinks of how many hours he spent here, alone with this image. It occurs to him that the painting is not the center of the story either. It's the mirror, the stage prop, the excuse. The real story is happening off canvas, in kitchens, on phone calls, in half-finished emails, and late-night walks across campus. Still, he is grateful for the excuse. He stands there until his phone buzzes. "Ana, about that coffee, Saturday, 11? There's a place near my apartment. Small, good pastries. No gold frames." He smiles. "Perfect," he types back. "I'll be there. Just me." He almost adds, "No lectures," but she already knows. Instead, he puts the phone away and looks at the painting one last time before leaving. The 6th chapter settles here, with a woman who refuses to let her mentor escape into theory, a man beginning to understand that being watched can be a form of care as much as judgment, and a rose that remains exactly where it has always been, while all the living things around it finally start to move. Chapter 7. Coffee without a lecture. The cafe Ana chose is small, the kind of place that tries very hard not to be impressive. No marble counters, no industrial lamps, no curated art on the walls. Just mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu written in slightly crooked handwriting, and the smell of coffee that has nothing to prove. The only decoration is a plant on the windowsill that looks determined to survive despite someone forgetting to water it regularly. Julian arrives 10 minutes early. He sits at a corner table facing the door, hands wrapped around a mug that is too hot to drink yet. Outside, the street moves at ordinary speed, people walking, dogs checking their phones, carrying groceries. Inside, time feels slower. Every time the door opens, his chest tightens, then relaxes when it's not her. He has given hundreds of talks in front of hundreds of people. His heart has never hammered quite like this. He rehearses nothing. That, for him, is new. There is no mental script, no list of points, no quote he is planning to slip in casually. All he has is one clear instruction echoing in his mind. Listen. The bell above the door jingles. She steps in, shoulders hunched slightly against the cold, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn denim jacket. Her hair is shorter than he remembers, Messier, with a streak of color that wasn't there the last time they sat at a table together. She scans the room, spots him, and pauses for half a second before walking over. "Hi," she says. "Hi," he answers, standing up as if this were a formal meeting. It feels wrong, so he sits down again quickly. "Do you want?" He gestures vaguely toward the counter. "Coffee," she says, "and one of those cinnamon things if they haven't run out." She orders. He watches her talk to the barista with an ease he has never had with strangers. She laughs at something the barista says, and for a second he sees the child she used to be, grinning with her whole face. Then she turns back, and the adult version sits down across from him, careful. "So," she says, tearing a corner off the cinnamon roll when it arrives. "No microphone. No projector. Just us." "Just us," he echoes. Silence sits down at the table with them. He resists the urge to fill it. "How are you?" he asks finally. It is a simple question, but it lands with history. She shrugs. "Depends on the day," she says. "Today I'm curious, a little nervous, slightly overdosed on caffeine." He smiles. "Curious is good," he says. "You always were. Don't do that, she says, but not sharply. Don't talk about who I always was. You haven't been around enough to make those statements. He nods. Fair, he says. Tell me who you are now, then. If you want. She looks at him for a long moment, as if deciding how much weight his question can carry. I work at a small studio, she says. We do visual stuff, video installations, weird interactive things that make old people say, "Is this art?" He can't help it. He laughs. And is it? He asks. Sometimes, she says. Sometimes it's just rent. She sips her coffee. I like it, she adds. It's messy, collaborative. No one gets to stand at the front and talk while everyone else takes notes. He hears the implied contrast. I'm glad, he says. It suits you. You don't know what suits me, she replies, but there's a ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. You're guessing, but I'll accept the guess for now. She breaks off another piece of cinnamon roll. I saw the clip of you talking about my drawing, she says suddenly. He freezes. I didn't name you, he says quickly. I tried. I know, she cuts in. You said my daughter. It was enough. I recognized the story. She chews, then continues. I remember that drawing. I remember the fridge. I don't remember the article you were working on. The words are not a knife, exactly. They are a diagnosis. I do, he says. I remember the title, the journal, the reviewer comments. I remember how proud I was when it got accepted. He looks at his hands. I don't remember what you were wearing in the drawing, he admits, or if the sun was on the left or the right, or whether the tree touched the house. She nods slowly. That's the problem, she says. Your memory is curated. All frames, no fridge. They let that sit. I can't fix that, he says. I can't go back and swap them, your drawing on the wall, my article in a drawer. I know, she says. I didn't come here for magic. I came to see if you can be present when nothing is being recorded. He meets her eyes. I can try, he says. I'm trying now. She studies his face, searching for performance. He lets her. Why now? She asks. Why this sudden urge to what? Confess? Repair? Midlife crisis content? He almost reaches for a quote about crisis and opportunity. He stops himself. Because I ran out of excuses, I believed, he says instead. Because I realized the story I tell about myself doesn't match the story you could tell about me. And because that painting, he breaks off, then smiles at his own reflex. Sorry, he says. I promised no lectures. You can mention the painting, she says. I know it exists. The whole internet knows it exists. Just don't turn it into a metaphor every 5 seconds. Deal, he says. It shook me. More than I expected. It made it harder to look away from certain things. From you. She exhales a tired sound. You've been looking away for a long time, she says. I know, he says. He doesn't justify, doesn't explain. They drink coffee. They talk about smaller things. Her roommate's terrible taste in music, his students' creative ways of avoiding reading, the city's awful public transport. The conversation moves in cautious circles, like two people rediscovering how to share space without stepping on each other's feet. At one point, she glances at the clock on her phone. I have to get back, she says. We're installing a piece this afternoon. If I'm late, my team will replace me with someone who answers emails faster." He nods. "Thank you for meeting me," he says. "You didn't lecture," she says. "That's already a step up." She stands, slips on her jacket, then hesitates. "Can I ask you something?" she says. "Anything," he answers. "Are you doing all these lectures because you want to change?" she asks. "Or because you want people to see you changing?" He feels the question hit center. "I don't know yet," he says honestly. "Maybe both. Probably both." She considers that. "Okay," she says. "Here's my selfish condition then. If you want me in your life, let our conversations be the ones you don't repeat on stage. Keep something just for us." He nods, throat tight. "I will," he says. "Good," she says. "I don't want to hear myself quoted in your next talk." He smiles. "You won't," he says. "This is off the record." She gives him a look that is part suspicion, part trust. "We'll see," she says. "Text me next week." Not with an essay. Just, "How are you?" Or, "I saw something that reminded me of you," or, "I finally tried that horrible music you like." Normal things. "Normal," he repeats, as if trying out a new language. "I can do normal." "We're about to find out," she says. She leaves. The bell over the door jingles again. The cafe returns to its usual rhythm. Julian sits alone with an empty cup and the faint smell of cinnamon, feeling less like a professor and more like a man who has just passed the easiest and hardest test of his recent life, shutting up. Later that week, back in his apartment, another kind of test waits. His wife is in the living room, sorting through a box of old photos. The coffee table is covered in snapshots, vacations, birthdays, random afternoons. The house is full of younger versions of themselves. He stands in the doorway. "What are you doing?" he asks carefully. "Trying to see if we ever existed," she says, not looking up. "There's evidence we did." He walks over, sits on the edge of the couch, picks up a photo at random, the three of them on a beach, sun in their eyes, sand on their legs. "I met Anna for coffee," he says. "I know," she replies. "She sent me a message. She wasn't sure whether to tell me. I told her secrets are what got us here." He nods. "How was it?" she asks, still focused on the photos. "Strange," he says. "Good. Heavy. Ordinary. That sounds about right," she says. He hesitates. "I'm sorry," he says quietly. "Not just for her. For you. For everything I chose to frame instead of this." She sets a picture down. "If you're apologizing so you can feel better and go back to normal," she says, "I'm not interested. If you're apologizing because you finally see the cracks, then we can keep talking." "I see them," he says. "Everywhere." "Good," she says. "Maybe now we can stop pretending the wall is smooth." They go through the photos together. Some make them smile. Some make them wince. Some they set aside without comment. It's not reconciliation, not yet. It's more like an inventory of what was, what wasn't, what might still be possible. That night, when Julian sits at his desk to prepare the final lecture of the series, the one about the frame and its limits, he opens a new document and writes one sentence. "This last evening is not about the painting. It is about everything the painting cannot hold." He looks at it and thinks of the cafe, of the living room strewn with photos, of Laura in the back of the auditorium watching him for signs of honesty. For the first time, he plans a lecture that does not feel like the main event. It feels like a report. The 7th chapter ends there, not with a grand revelation, but with a quiet shift, conversations that don't become material, apologies that don't turn into performances, and a man who is starting to understand that the real work of his life may happen in rooms without an audience. Chapter 8. The Frame and Its Limits. The final auditorium of the series feels heavier, more expectant. Not because it is fuller, though it is, but because everyone knows this is the end. No more weeks of build-up. No more suspense about what Julian Serra will say next. Tonight, the circle closes around the golden frame, the white rose, the fractured background. Or it doesn't. He stands backstage one last time, projector remote in hand, notes folded in his pocket. The slide deck is ready, close-ups of the frame's ornate edges, diagrams of borders in art history, quotes about exclusion and inclusion. He has rehearsed the safe version of this lecture a dozen times in his head. It would be clean, academic, conclusive. But safe feels dishonest now. The house lights dim. He steps onto the stage. Applause rises, warm and familiar. On the screens behind him, the painting appears in full. Rose at center, gold encircling, cracks beneath, frame containing it all. He waits for quiet. Tonight, he says, we reach the edge. His voice is steady, but softer than in previous weeks. Less performance, more conversation. The frame, he continues, not the gold we talked about last time that was power, value, announcement. The frame itself is something quieter, more structural. It is the line between what you see and what stays forever outside. It decides inclusion, exclusion, what belongs in the story. He clicks. The screen zooms to the painting's border, intricate swirls of gold leaf, meeting canvas at a hard, unyielding edge. In art, he says, frames were never innocent. In the Renaissance, they mimicked windows promising a glimpse into another world. In the Baroque, they became thrones for the image inside. Today, we often strip them away, pretending the canvas speaks for itself. But the edge is always there. Invisible, maybe, but real. He paces slowly. What I want to ask tonight, he says, is what happens at your edges. The people, moments, truths you keep outside the frame, not because they lack value, but because including them would change the picture too much. He pauses. In the front row, a familiar face, the department chair, notebook open, pen poised. In the back, Laura, arms crossed, watching like a quiet judge. His wife is not here. Ana sent a text this morning. Good luck. Don't mention me. He didn't. I'll start with myself, he says. For years, my professional frame was wide and ornate. It held lectures, books, conferences, students, colleagues. It looked complete. Impressive, even. He gestures to the screen. But there were things I left out. Deliberately. My daughter's school plays because they clashed with deadlines. Nights with my wife because I was in the zone with an article. Friendships that required vulnerability instead of performance. Doubts that didn't fit the image of the eloquent professor. The room shifts. Some people nod, others stare at their programs. Those exclusions weren't accidents, he says. They were choices. I framed my life to maximize admiration, clarity, control. Anything messy, demanding, unresolved got cropped. He clicks again. The slide splits, the painting on one side. On the other, a blank white border, empty space extending infinitely. This is the hardest truth about frames, he says. They don't just hold what's inside. They actively define what's outside as other, less worthy, not part of the composition. He stops center stage. Last week over coffee with my daughter, not as material for this talk, but as two people trying to rebuild something, I realized how much I had cropped her out. Not maliciously, not always consciously, but consistently enough that she learned to stop stepping into my picture. A few gasps, quickly muffled. He feels exposed, but keeps going. My wife too, he says. I framed her as supportive spouse, the reliable background to my foreground achievements. I didn't see how that role starved her of the messy, equal partnership she deserved. He thinks of the photos on their coffee table last night, laughing, arguing, silent, spread out like evidence in a trial. And there's a third person here tonight, he says, glancing toward Laura. She meets his eyes, unflinching. A former student, now colleague, who has spent years watching me preach about art's transformative power while living as if ideas could substitute for presence. She called me on it, refused to let me hide behind theory. That's harder than applause. Laura's expression doesn't change, but her posture softens slightly. These aren't confessions for sympathy, he says. They're examples of how we all draw lines around our time, our emotions, our stories. We say this fits, that doesn't, and the world outside the frame doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows quieter. Sometimes it walks away. He clicks. The screen shows historical frames, ornate Renaissance windows, minimalist modern borders, empty white gallery walls. Art history is full of debates about frames, he says. Remove them and the painting breathes. Keep them and you control the gaze. But no frame lasts forever. They tarnish. They crack. They get replaced by tastes, by politics, by time. He turns back to the audience. Your frames will change too, he says. Status fades. Applause moves on. The people you cropped out may stop knocking. When that happens, you'll stand before a canvas that feels too small or too crowded. And you'll have to decide, widen it, redraw it, break it entirely. He lets that image linger. I've spent this series talking as if the painting were the subject, he says. But really, it's been a mirror, a way to look at my edges without pretending they're solid walls. He gestures to the full image behind him. The rose is beauty. The gold is power. The cracks are time. The frame is every choice about what matters enough to include. He takes a breath. So here is my question for you, and for me. What are you ready to let in? Not as an idea, not as a lecture point, but as a real, complicating, human presence that might reshape the whole picture? Silence follows. Not uncomfortable, but full. Pen scratch. Eyes meet across rows. I don't have answers yet, he admits. I met my daughter for coffee last week. We talked not perfectly, not like a movie reunion, but honestly. I'm talking more with my wife about the photos we've ignored, the silences we framed as normal. My colleague is still holding me accountable, which is terrifying and necessary. He smiles faintly. But I've started, he says, messily, one conversation at a time. He steps forward. Thank you for witnessing this, he says. Not as entertainment, not as a TED Talk, but as company. For letting me think out loud about a painting that turned out to be about living. Applause swells stronger than expected, laced with something deeper than politeness. People stand. Whispers spread. That was? I need to call. Julian stays on stage as the room empties, projector still humming faintly. The painting glows behind him, unchanged. Laura approaches first, notebook closed. You did it, she says simply. Did what? He asks. Didn't hide, she replies. Named us. All of us. He exhales. It felt right, he says. It was, she says. Now live it. The department chair shakes his hand warmly, murmurs about prestige and publications. Students linger, asking careful questions about vulnerability in art. He answers briefly, eyes already on the door. Outside, his phone lights up. Ana, heard it was tonight. Watched the live stream. You kept your promise. Talk soon? His wife, at home. We have photos to sort. And a conversation. He walks into the night, the auditorium shrinking behind him. The museum is closed, but he can picture the rows waiting, edges sharp as ever. For the first time, he doesn't need to see it. The 8th chapter closes there, on a stage still echoing with honest applause, a man stepping out into a life no longer perfectly framed, carrying not answers but enough questions and enough people willing to live them with him, to make the edges worth expanding. Chapter 9 and finale, the last conference. 3 months later. The auditorium is nearly empty this time. No posters line the halls. No projector hums. No crowd gathers with notebooks or phones held high. Just a single folding chair in the center of the stage, facing a small table with a laptop. On the screen, the golden rose glows softly. Its frame is ornate, its cracks as patient as ever. Julian Serra sits in the chair, older somehow, though only weeks have passed. His jacket hangs on the backrest. His sleeves are rolled up. He looks like a man who has spent mornings moving furniture, not polishing speeches. The door in row 12 creaks open. Footsteps echo briefly, then hush. He doesn't turn. He knows who it is. You came, he says. Ana slips into a seat near the aisle, hands in her lap. She's dressed for work, practical shoes, hair pulled back, but her eyes are the same, watchful, weighing. I said I would, she replies. Another set of footsteps, lighter. His wife appears stage left, pausing at the edge of the light. She carries nothing, no purse, no coat, just herself. I wasn't sure, Julian admits, glancing between them. This isn't poster-worthy. His wife smiles faintly, almost despite herself. That's why I'm here, she says. One more shadow in the back. Laura, notebook absent, arms crossed loosely. She nods once when he looks her way. No judgment tonight, just presence. Julian exhales. The room feels vast and intimate at once, like the pause between breaths. This is the last conference, he begins, voice carrying easily in the quiet. Not because we've solved the painting, not because I have final wisdom to dispense, but because I finally understand a frame isn't something you perfect. It's something you keep testing, widening, breaking when necessary. On the screen, the rose holds steady. He doesn't look at it. When this series began, he says, I thought I was analyzing an object, a minor work by a forgotten painter. I stood in front of it and saw beauty, power, time, limits. I built 4 lectures around those ideas, convinced they would lead somewhere conclusive. He leans forward, elbows on knees. They led here, he says, to an empty room, to the 4 of us, to conversations that happened off stage in kitchens and cafes, over cold coffee and old photos. Aina shifts slightly. His wife watches the screen, then him, then the floor. I told you stories during these talks, he continues, about absence, about choices, about the weight of admiration when it comes from strangers, but not from home. What I couldn't say then is how those talks were only the visible part, the frame. He gestures to the women around him. You were the part outside it, he says, the part that didn't applaud, the part that waited while I learned to stop performing. Aina, you made me practice silence, actual listening, not the kind that waits for your turn to speak. Elena, he nods to his wife, you made me sort through evidence instead of explanations. Photos that didn't lie. Moments I had cropped. Lavra, you refused to let me turn pain into theory. You said, live it. Laura's mouth quirks. I may have been harsh. You were right, he says simply. The screen behind him zooms slowly to the edge of the frame, where gold meets blank wall. The line is crisp, final. Tonight isn't about answers, he says. It's about admitting I don't have a tidy conclusion. My marriage isn't healed, but we're talking about resentment, about hope, about whether we remember why we started. Aina and I aren't fixed, but we text. We meet. She tells me about her work. I tell her about students who remind me of her stubborn brilliance. Lavra and I collaborate not as mentor and student, but as 2 people trying to make space for truth in a system built for polish. He stands pacing the small stage. The painting stays in the museum, he says. It will outlast all of us. Its rose won't wilt. Its gold won't tarnish in our lifetime. Its cracks won't spread further. It's perfect in its permanence. He stops center. Our frames aren't like that, he says. They shift. They crack under pressure. People walk in, walk out. Sometimes you redraw the edges entirely. But here's what I've learned, messily, at great cost. A life worth framing isn't one that looks complete. It's one where the people you need most are willing to step inside, even when the borders are rough. He turns to the screen one last time. Thank you, he says to the painting, for being a mirror I couldn't ignore. And thank you, he looks at each woman, for standing at the edge until I widened it. Silence falls, full and warm. No applause. No questions. Just breathing. Aina stands first. Walks to the stage without hurry. You didn't lecture, she says. I know, he replies. Good, she says, and hugs him brief, fierce daughter to father. His wife joins them. Takes his hand not romantically, but solidly. Partners. Lavra lingers by her seat, then approaches. No epiphany, she says. No big revelation. Just this. He nods. Just this. She smiles. Better ending. They leave together not as a perfect family, not as a flawless redemption arc, but as 4 people who have agreed to share a frame, however imperfect, however temporary. Outside, the campus night wraps around them. Stars above, streetlights below. The museum looms dark in the distance, the rose waiting patiently for its next visitor. Julian doesn't look back. The end. Thank you for joining this journey. If you enjoyed the golden rose contemplating its beauty while hearing the stories it inspired, subscribe now to keep discovering fascinating works of art, each paired with optional, gripping stories like this one. New masterpieces, new voices. Your next obsession awaits.